Hello and welcome to Yesterday's Airlines for another detailed model review of a recent 400 scale release. In this case, the Aeroclassics United Airlines Boeing 727-22 N7001U. Now obviously this aircraft is a classic aircraft, but also it's a modern aircraft, and that's because this plane has been preserved, being the number one 727 off the production line. It now resides at the Museum of Flight in Seattle and is wearing this exact scheme, the delivery scheme that it wore when delivered to United Airlines all the way back in 1964. So there's plenty of photos of this airplane around, you can go and see it, so it'll be interesting to see how AC have done in terms of getting the review right. But before we move on to the actual review itself, obviously as always my reviews are split into three sections. You can get a maximum score of 10 for the mold, you can get a maximum score of 10 for the paint and the livery application, and you can get a maximum score of 10 for quality control and build and printing. And so that adds up to a total of 30 as the maximum score. So without further ado, let's get on to looking at the Boeing 727-100 in 400 scale. Now there have been a few 727-100 molds produced in 400 scale. They haven't been used a lot in recent years. You can see we've got a couple in the background, but the Aeroclassics mold that this is using is far and away the most prolific. They've probably produced 3 or 4 times as many as anybody else has. And you know, for that reason, it's just as well that it's actually a good mold, a mold that I like a lot. There's also a mold that has only just recently returned to the scale. It hadn't been used since 2014. Aeroclassics brought it back in August or so last year, and now they're using it quite a lot to produce models like this one, which I can't believe hadn't been made earlier. So let's take a closer look at the aircraft itself. The 727-100 obviously looks very much like 200 in most ways. The mold on this, the nose on this mold is really nice. Aeroclassics Boeing noses are generally very good, and I like this one quite a lot. I also like the undercarriage. Yes, it's the Aeroclassics kind of simple-ish style, but especially at the rear main gear there, the doors are really good on their 727. Well, both the 727s, but the 100 looks nice. On the front, it looks great. One of the important things to understand about 727-100 is, unlike the 200, the central engine intake is not circular, it is more of an oval, and that's an important detail they've got correct. Obviously it's an older mold, it's got a seam, but in many ways a more discreet seam than the Series 200 has. It's not enormously tight, but it's relatively discreet and slips just around underneath the fuselage. No real problems there for me. Just like their 200, it's probably the tail which is the least accurate portion of the mold. There should be more of a kink up turn here, and there isn't, and you know, sometimes you could argue the angles and things aren't 100% correct. Generally, I like this mold. It's a good older mold that Aeroclassics are using, and there's no better 727-100 around. And even though people give it a bit of a bashing now and then for not being, you know, 2020 perfect, I think it's more than adequate for the models that are being made. I think it's a really nice mold. And you know, let's have a look at the competition and see, you know, what's around. I've only got a couple of the competitors here. First of all, we've got the Dragon Wings, and you can see that it's on the stand. The actual fuselage and general look and feel of the Dragon Wing 727 is actually really good, and you can see this model looks awesome on the stand. It wouldn't look anywhere near as good if it had the undercarriage on, because the Dragon Wing 727 undercarriage is rubbish, and also falls off all the time, really annoyingly, which is the reason I don't have it here on the actual model. The other problem with the Dragon is the shape of the central engine intake, which is just round, so they've got that wrong. Quite a major detail to get incorrect. But having said that, the rest of the mold is nice, and the tail is probably the best tail of any of the 727s in 400 scale, be they 100 or 200. The other mold, which has been used within the last decade at least, is the Gemini mold. This mold is probably the youngest of the three, but it hasn't got a huge amount of use. You can see that it's also a seamed mold, so it doesn't gain any points there. The undercarriage doors are not quite in the right place, and I don't think the nose is quite as nice. But then again, the tail, yeah, I mean, it's okay. Again, it doesn't really have the upturn, and this mold was criticised quite a lot because the slot-in stabilizers often kind of drooped. Gemini got very grumpy about getting criticised by people for that, and to be honest, they've barely used the mold since. I don't know if the two are connected or whether it's just because Gemini don't generally produce classics. This is actually quite a nice model, and it's a decent mold. I wouldn't have a problem buying it. You know, it compares quite nicely, but you know, I've got lots of the Aeroclassics version, and you know, I think the Aeroclassics version stands up very nicely. So you know, all three are decent. You could argue that none of them are perfect, and you'd be right. I personally am more than happy with the Aeroclassics. I think that from a mold perspective, this is getting an 8 out of 10. Okay, let's get on to looking at the livery. So what we've got here is the United mainliner livery that was used on these very early 727s. It's unique to them, and nobody else had a livery in the fleet that was exactly the same. And the big difference between this and earlier mainliners is the fact that there's this break here where the shield is between the cheat line. It was not repeated, and it gives them a different look to the rest of the United fleet of the 1960s. In fact, these are the last mainliners, or the last aircraft that were called mainliners, and you can see just about in tiny lettering back here that it says 727 mainliner. A really nice touch by Aeroclassics. There's a silly place to put 727 mainliner, incidentally, because the area generally got covered in soot. But you know, overall, Aeroclassics has done a pretty good job here. They've got the primary aspects of the scheme correct. They've got this thin golden pinstripe that runs along the silver belly here, which stops in line with the angle of the blue cheat line. The shield is all looking good. The titles look nice. They've got the rego on the engines. The tail is looking perfect as well. You know, they've done a solid job here. I don't think they've made any huge mistakes. I would say the blue colour is perhaps a little dark. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh, perhaps a little bit dark. You know, but otherwise, the majority of the aspects of the scheme are present and correct. Having said that, you know, as always with AC, they're not necessarily all correct. And I don't know if I can easily show you this. I've got another iPad here with the image on it, but if you look at the tail of this aircraft, you'll notice two things. Firstly, that the 727 text should be hollow, which again is a nightmare to see in real life. And the other thing is that there's a curve here at the front of the side engines. So do Aeroclassics get those features correct? No, they don't. If you look at the actual model, then you'll see that they've got block text as the 727 there, and underneath here you'll see that it's just a square cut off. So those aspects, you know, no, not gigantic, are not great. Otherwise, overall, I think the rest of the scheme is looking pretty good. No major problems. So I'm going to knock a couple of points off for the three things which I have issue with: the colour of the blue, the angle on that side engines, and the lack of hollow 727 titles. So that's another 8 out of 10. So the last section is the printing of the model. What you're getting here is good, solid Aeroclassics style printing. Some nice aspects. You can see how they print the flaps here quite nicely, where they've not indented in the mold itself. That's nice. In general, the printing isn't bad. It's relatively simple, but you get, you know, the basics. You get the stuff you need. You get the cargo doors. You get decent printing around. I do think Aeroclassics struggle a little bit on accuracy on printing. I'm just making it, you know, really nice. And again, this model kind of shows that a bit. I think that their nose cone is a little bit sloppy and probably a little bit too large, to be honest. The black there. They do have the grey colour here correctly, though, which is nice. But again, also there's a bit of overprinting here, where they printed this over the blue cheat line. You can kind of see a bit underneath. So yeah, it's not perfect, but it's more than adequate. It's a good representation of the aircraft. It looks nice, but it's kind of the sort of quality you tend to get from AC. Now, in terms of the build of the actual aircraft itself, yeah, I mean, it's all fitted together well. I do think the seam here could do with a bit of work. That's probably a mold issue, or the age of the mold maybe. It's not quite as tight as it might be. And this particular model has been annoying the hell out of me because the front nose gear keeps on falling off. One of the tyres keeps on coming off. And I know people complain about it a lot with AC. I don't tend to have this issue that often, but when you do have it, it's always like with that model forevermore, that nose gear is going to fall off. And so I'm going to have to be really careful with the nose gear on this 727 to make sure it doesn't fall off. With my other 727s, you know, majority of them don't have that issue. So again, you know, it's a solid effort in terms of the printing. It's a solid effort in terms of putting the model together, but not perfect. And I think, again, I'm going to have to give it an 8. So that's an 8 for the printing and quality control. Okay, so for the last section, the summary, I'll just bring you over to my United fleet just to show you, you know, this aircraft fits in really nicely with that fleet, and it's a really important missing component now filled. And also, Aeroclassics are producing not 1, not 2, not 3, but including the Saul Bass one, which is off the way up here somewhere, 4 727-100s in recent months, alongside this one here, which I think is much older release. So, you know, there's really been filling some really nice gaps in this fleet. This is a really solid Aeroclassics release. It's not perfect, few models are, but it's a really nice example and fits nicely in. And the combined score was 8 for the mold, 8 for the printing, 8 for the livery. So, you know, it's decent. You're getting 24 out of 30 there. It's not a bad score, and it is a very nice model which fits beautifully into my United Classic Era fleet. So, you know, I strongly recommend, if you like United, if you know, have a classic United fleet, you're going to need this model. And it's available, obviously, at Aeroclassics Direct. Cool. Anyway, as always, thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. You know, check me out on Instagram at Yes to Airlines. Check me out on Facebook, and keep an eye on the site for all the latest news in 400 scale. Thanks very much for watching. See you later.